For years, the house on Hollow Road stood silent, an oddity in the small town of Little Hollow. It wasn't just its derelict state that unsettled passers-by, but the way its features seemed to smile. The sagging roof curved into a grotesque grin, and the windows, cracked and covered in grime, gleamed like watchful eyes. Locals whispered that the house had a face of its own, and over time, it had earned a fitting name, the Grinning House. No one dared to enter, not after the stories began circulating. It was said that those who crossed the threshold were never the same, if they came back at all. It was a bitterly cold autumn evening when Jack received the dare. He had always been reckless, and his friends knew he wouldn't turn down a challenge no matter how foolish. They sat at the old diner near the outskirts of town, the windows fogged up from the heat inside. Olivia, with her mischievous grin, leaned over the table. "Go inside the Grinning House and stay the night," she said. Her voice was playful, but the gleam in her eyes was sharp. Jack laughed, but something about the dare tugged at his bravado. "That's it? Stay one night?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but he felt the weight of the challenge settle in his chest. "Yep, sunrise or nothing," Olivia said, leaning back and crossing her arms. The other three at the table watched with a mixture of excitement and unease. There was a reason no one had ever followed through with staying in the house. Most didn't even go beyond the gate. But Jack was different. At least, that's what he wanted everyone to believe. "I'll do it," he said, forcing a grin. The others cheered, though their laughter felt thin against the crackle of the diner's old radio. Jack stood before the Grinning House just after the sunset, the last traces of daylight bleeding away into the sky. His breath puffed in the cold air as he walked up the crooked path leading to the front door. The house loomed over him, its sloping roof twisted into that unsettling smile. From this close, he swore the windows, those hollow, black voids, were staring at him, waiting. He shook his head, dismissing the thought. "It's just an old house," he muttered to himself, gripping the flashlight in his hand. He pushed the creaking door open and stepped inside. The air inside was stale, thick with dust, as though it hadn't moved in decades. Jack clicked on his flashlight, sweeping it across the foyer. The walls were lined with faded, peeling wallpaper, and the wooden floor groaned beneath his feet. A narrow staircase twisted upward to the second floor, disappearing into shadows. Jack closed the door behind him, the sound echoing unnaturally through the house. The moment it clicked shut, an odd sensation washed over him. The air felt heavier, thicker, like the house had sealed itself, locking him inside. Shrugging off the sudden unease, he reminded himself of the dare. One night. Sunrise wasn't far off. He could handle it. The hours dragged on, and Jack wandered from room to room. Most were empty, just filled with dust and decay. A few still held old, rotting furniture, couches with torn upholstery, a rocking chair in the corner that seemed to sway ever so slightly when Jack wasn't looking directly at it. In one room, a cracked mirror hung upon the wall, its glass foggy and warped. As Jack passed, he caught a glimpse of his reflection, or at least he thought it was his. For a split second, his reflection wasn't smiling. His mouth was set in a grim line, but in the mirror it curved upwards into a wide grin. Jack stared for a moment, his heart thudding in his chest. When he blinked, the reflection had returned to normal. "Old house, old mirror," he muttered, shaking it off, though the hairs on the back of his neck prickled. He moved on to the next room. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the creak of floorboards beneath his feet and the occasional soft thump from somewhere upstairs. The house seemed to breathe, the walls sighing with each step he took. Then, just after midnight, the whispers began. At first, they were so faint that Jack thought he was imagining them. A soft, indistinct murmuring, like a distant conversation taking place just beyond his hearing. He paused in the hallway, straining to listen. The whispers faded, replaced by the sound of his own heartbeat thudding in his ears. But as he moved deeper into the house, they returned, louder this time. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was raspy, broken, as though it hadn't been used in years. Centuries, even. Jack's flashlight flickered, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. He froze, listening intently, but the whispers stopped once again. His pulse quickened. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice breaking the thick silence. No answer came, only the creaking of the house settling around him. As the night wore on, the house seemed to change. The walls, once solid and decrepit, seemed to close in, warping ever so slightly. Rooms shifted. Hallways that once led to the kitchen now circled back to the foyer. The staircase spiraled in unnatural ways, its steps leading into endless darkness. The whispers grew louder. Jack could no longer ignore them. They were no longer faint. They hissed in his ear, urgent and angry. "Get out. Leave before it's too late." The grin on the house's exterior, so unsettling from the outside, seemed to be reflected inside now. Every surface seemed to curve and stretch, like the house itself was smiling wider, anticipating something. Jack began to feel the pressure of unseen eyes watching him from the shadows. The longer he stayed, the more he felt the house itself was alive, almost aware of his presence, almost stalking him. The floors creaked as though someone or something was walking just behind him. But when he turned, there was nothing. Always nothing. He stopped in front of that one cracked mirror again, unable to resist the pull. This time, the reflection that stared back wasn't his at all. It was a distorted version of him, pale, gaunt, with eyes wide and lips stretched into an impossibly wide grin. The figure in the mirror moved on its own, raising a hand in a slow, deliberate wave. Jack stumbled back, his breath coming in shallow gasps. His reflection's grin grew wider until it seemed to split his face. Panicked now, Jack raced through the house, searching for the front door. But every time he thought he had found it, the house shifted again. The walls twisted, the hallways elongated. The windows, those grinning, watching windows, glowed faintly, mocking him. There was no escape. In his frantic search, Jack stumbled upon a hidden door, tucked away behind a bookshelf in the study. Desperate, he pulled it open and found a narrow staircase leading down into a basement. The air was cold and damp, and the smell of rot grew stronger as he descended. At the bottom of the stairs, Jack found something he wasn't prepared for. Rows of mirrors lining the walls of the basement. Each mirror reflected something different. Twisted, nightmarish versions of people he didn't know, their faces frozen in grotesque, grinning expressions. And then he saw it, the source of the whispers. At the center of the room, standing before the largest mirror, was a figure. It was impossibly tall, its limbs long and spindly, its face hidden beneath a veil of shadows. But Jack could see its mouth, a wide, gaping smile that stretched from ear to ear, too large for its face. The figure turned to face him, its grin widening even further, and Jack realized with horror that the whispers were coming from it. "We're all smiles here," the voice rasped. The mirrors around the room flickered, and in each one Jack saw himself, his own face, distorted, smiling that same horrible grin. He backed away, but the figure stepped closer, its presence suffocating. The last thing Jack saw before the darkness consumed him was his own reflection in the largest mirror, smiling back at him, trapped forever in the Grinning House. Weeks passed before anyone mentioned Jack again. When his friends finally worked up the courage to return to the Grinning House, they found the door wide open. Inside, everything was as it had been before. Dusty, decaying, with no sign of Jack. Except for one thing. The cracked mirror in the hallway. Now, instead of a single reflection, there were two. Both smiling. And the house's grin had never looked wider.